It's my pleasure to present. And today we're going to talk about Essentials of Caregiving, Medicaid and Medicare. And let's get started by talking about Medicaid. And essentially what we want to do is know that if we need long-term care, so if we cannot live on our own anymore and we need some assistance, there are ways to pay for that long-term care. We can use private pay, so we can always pay out of our own pocket to pay for long-term care. If we're lucky enough to have gotten long-term care insurance, we can use long-term care insurance to pay for long-term care. And this can be, I forgot to mention, it's not only in the nursing home, but we can get long-term care in our home. We can get long-term care in assisted living or in a day facility, daycare facility for adults. If we don't have long-term care insurance and we are a veteran, and we served at least 90 days in the military, with one of those days being during wartime, we can get aid and attendance. And that is a benefit that's available that is means tested, meaning that they look at how much money you have, both income and resources, but that can help pay for long-term care as well. And then we also can look at Medicaid to help pay for long-term care. Now notice I have in bold on the other side of the screen, not Medicare. We cannot look to Medicare to pay for long-term care. You may say, Carol, I was in the nursing home and Medicare paid my whole stay, so you're wrong. And it's true, I've been wrong before, but in this case, Medicare paid for skilled nursing care like physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech therapy, but it didn't pay for custodial care. Custodial care is long-term care that you need where you can have an unskilled person provide that assistance. And nursing home care that is custodial, Medicare doesn't pay for, unfortunately. Medicaid is a government program, much like Medicare, but it helps pay for long-term care. Most Medicaid dollars do go to nursing home care. That's just the way the program is set up. Although I understand that there's some legislation out there that is going to put more dollars into paying for home care for folks who are elderly or with disabilities. But as it stands right now, the Medicaid program, most Medicaid dollars go to nursing home care. However, there are some Medicaid programs that pay for home care. The best of these programs is called the Star Plus Waiver Program. And there's a waiting list for that program. So I've given you the telephone number to call if you're in Bexar County to get on that waiting list. And I apologize for not putting in the other number for the non-Bexar County. Let me just make sure I gave you the Bexar County number. Yes, I gave you the Bexar County number. But if you want to get the other number, you can always contact me and I can give it to you. And I'll give my email address in the chat, if I can find the chat.
I can do that, Carol.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. That way I won't put in a typo and you call somebody else. So the Star Plus Waiver Program pays for long-term care in the home. Now, it's never 24-hour care. If you need 24-hour care and you don't have someone at home who can help take care of you, you're going to be looking at nursing home care. But if you've got someone at home to provide assistance and they just need care during the day or someone to provide care during the day, then get on the Star Plus Waiver waiting list now, because that waiting list can be quite long. It can go even as much as a year. So get on it beforehand. Now, let me get back let's talk a little bit about what you need to do to be eligible for Medicaid to pay for your long-term care. If you are in, well, whatever state you're in, you need to be a citizen or a lawfully admitted permanent resident of the United States. In addition, if you need Texas Medicaid, you need to be a Texas resident. Now that's not hard. All you have to do is say, hey, here I am, I'm in Texas and I want to be a resident. And that's good enough for Medicaid. So if you're in Texas and you want Texas Medicaid, you want to be a citizen and a Texas resident. You also need to meet something called medical necessity. Medical necessity is a little bit more than just being disabled. To meet medical necessity, you need the services of a licensed person like an LVN on a regular basis. The easiest way to meet medical necessity is for someone to have dementia, and then they cannot medicate themselves because they can't remember, did I take my meds? Did I not take my meds? Have I taken everything I'm supposed to take? So having dementia is almost certainly going to meet medical necessity. If you don't have dementia, then we have to look at other illnesses to see if you're going to meet medical necessity. The two elements of Medicaid, the financial elements of Medicaid eligibility, are income and resources. So we have to meet, in addition to the citizenship and the medical necessity, we have to meet the limits on income and resources. Those limits, the basic limits, are gross countable resources or gross countable income of no more than $2,382 and countable resources of no more than $2,000. And we're going to talk about what's income and what are resources so that that'll make a little more sense. First, let's talk about income. So when we're talking about what is your income, we're talking about your Social Security, your civil service annuity, your teacher's retirement. If you're over 72 and you're getting required minimum distributions from your IRA, that's income. If you've got a rent house and you're getting income from that, that's income. Anything like that is going to be your income, and your income needs to be less than $2,382 a month. But wait, don't worry. If your income happens to be greater than the income cap, the $2,382 gross monthly income, don't worry. Income is never an obstacle for nursing home Medicaid because we have something called the Miller Trust. And that is just some extra hoops that we jump through, just some bureaucratic red tape that we jump through in order to qualify for Medicaid. I'm not going to go into the details of what it is and how it works. Just know that income is not going to be an obstacle for nursing home Medicaid. Now, it can be an obstacle for Medicaid in the home, but with the Star Plus waiver program, it is not an obstacle. Remember, I said that's the most robust home care program. And with Star Plus waiver, we also can do the income, the Miller Trust, and jump through those extra hoops and not have to worry about the income cap. So your key takeaway is, yes, there's an income cap, but no, it's not a problem. So you might wonder, why did I even mention it? Well, because people think, oh, my income is over this amount, I'm not going to qualify. Feel comfortable. We are going to get you qualified. Income is not going to be a problem. Now let's talk about resources. There's two kinds of resources for Medicaid. There's the Medicaid resources that are countable when determining if you're eligible or not, and the Medicaid resources that are exempt, that we don't count when we're determining eligibility. So for example, one homestead is exempt up to a total equity value of $603,000. That means that your homestead and all acreage that touches your homestead is exempt. It won't count against you for Medicaid purposes. So if you've got a farm in Wilson County and it's worth less than $603,000, then all of that is exempt and doesn't count. If you've got a house in San Antonio, it's going to be exempt. It doesn't count. One vehicle of any value is going to be exempt. Now, I don't recommend that you take your excess resources and go out and buy a Lamborghini, but if you did, that would be exempt and wouldn't count for Medicaid purposes. Wouldn't necessarily be the most useful asset, but it wouldn't count. Your IRAs, if you're over 72 and taking your required minimum distributions, are exempt for Medicaid. So you could have $1 million in an IRA. As long as you're over 72, that's not going to count against you. But remember, I said that your required minimum distributions, your RMDs, those count as income. But your IRA is not going to count as a resource. Your prepaid funeral plans do not count as a resource against you. So what does count? Well, all of your bank accounts, your investment accounts, your mutual funds, your CDs, those things count. If you've got rental property, that counts. If you've got life insurance that has a cash value, the cash value of the life insurance counts, because you could surrender that policy, cash it out, and use that money to pay for care. So that counts. Now, you may be thinking, oh my gosh, I can have no more than $2,000 in countable resources, and I've got a spouse at home. What are we going to do? That's not enough for us that's not enough for my spouse to survive. The good news is there is protection for married couples. If we've got one spouse who needs nursing home care and the other spouse is going to stay in the home, then we can protect resources for that spouse at home. First, we start out by taking all of the countable resources. And remember, that includes your separate property and your community property. So if your spouse is going into the nursing home and you are at home and you inherited that ranch in Wilson County from your parents, you may say, well, that's my separate property. That's my inheritance. Doesn't matter. If it's countable, whether it's separate or community, it's going to be considered. But what Medicaid does is take all of the countable resources, put it in a pot, and then cut it in half. Now, we don't have to cash out anything. We don't physically allocate money to one spouse and the other. This is just on paper as we're calculating what the spouse at home gets to keep. So we cut in half what they have, and the spouse at home gets to keep half of that. But there's a limit on that half. It's up to $130,380. This is called the spousal protected resource amount, or I call it the SPRA. So let's take an example just to see how this works. So the couple has total countable resources of $400,000. Remember, that doesn't include their homestead, doesn't include one car, doesn't include their IRAs if they're over 72, and doesn't include their prepaid funeral. But let's say they've got $400,000 in CDs. We split that in half, and that's $200,000 on each side. The spouse at home, though, only gets to keep up to the limit of $133.80. The SPRA is the full $133.80. And the remaining money, the $269, we've got to do something with before the ill spouse can qualify for Medicaid. Okay, let's look at another example. In this example, the couple only has countable resources of $100,000. So let's say they've got a house that's exempt, they've got a vehicle that's exempt, but they've got another vehicle and some cash. And so all of that together equals 100,000. Well, when we split that in half, the SPRA is only 50,000. The spouse at home gets to keep one half, and that's 50,000. That remaining 50,000, we've got to do something with before the spouse can qualify for Medicaid. What can be done with these excess resources? Well, one thing to know is that you can always spend that money on care. So if we've got 50,000 too much or 269,000 too much, we can always spend that on caregivers coming into the home, on nursing home care, on, we can spend it on debt, we can pay off debt, or we can spend it on exempt resources. For example, we could pay off the house mortgage, we could buy a car, we could buy a prepaid funeral plan. Spending the money is always okay. Medicaid doesn't have a problem if you spend the money on yourself or your spouse. What else can be done with excess resources? Well, there's something called expanding the SPRA, expanding the spousal protected resource amount. And we can do that if the couple's combined gross monthly income is less than $3,259.50. Okay, that means that if we've got a husband who's got $1,500 in Social Security income, and we've got a wife who's got $1,000 in Social Security income, so their gross combined monthly income is $2,500. Well, that's less than $3,259. That fact that their money is less than $3,259 means that the spouse at home gets to keep more in resources than just the SPRA. What else can be done with excess resources? You can make gifts, but gifting, if it's to the spouses, if it's spouse to spouse gifting, that's no problem. So if husband needs to get into the nursing home and we need to qualify him for Medicaid and transfer assets from him to the wife, we can do that and there's no problem. But if we make a gift to anyone else, to other than the spouse, Medicaid says, you don't need our help. You've got enough money to give away, then you don't need our help. If you want to do gifting, you want to consult an elder law attorney because there are strategies we can use, but we've got to remember that gifts are penalized. And for every day's worth of nursing home care that you give away, that's one day that Medicaid won't pay for your care. So gifting is possible, but it's not something to do. It's not something to say, oh, you know, I really want my son to have my house. I'm going to give it to him. And then 2 years later, you have a stroke and you end up needing nursing home care or long-term care of some sort. There's going to be a problem with qualifying because there's a 5-year look back for gifts. Medicaid says, and when you fill out your Medicaid application, they say, have you made any gifts in the last 5 years? And that gift of the house to the son is going to disqualify you, is going to be a penalty. There is going to be a penalty period to keep you from qualifying. Now, another thing to remember about Medicaid is the estate recovery program. That's when the state says, we let you keep your house while you were getting our help. And now that you've died, we want to get paid back from the exempt asset that you held on to, which is primarily the homestead. So this is called MERP, the Medicaid Estate Recovery Program, and it happens when the person dies, when the Medicaid recipient dies. As long as the Medicaid recipient is alive, there is no MERP, but at death, that's when the state wants to make this claim that they get paid back. Be very clear. If there is a surviving spouse, there is no MERP. That means that if your spouse is in the nursing home and she dies, and you, the husband or the wife, whichever is still alive, you don't have to pay the state back because there was a surviving spouse. That surviving spouse doesn't even have to be living in the home. Just as long as the spouse is surviving, there's no estate recovery. There's also no estate recovery if the person with the Medicaid recipient had a child with a disability. There's no estate recovery if the person with receiving Medicaid had an unmarried child who was living in the home for 12 months immediately preceding the Medicaid recipient's death. Now, there are other exceptions to estate recovery, but those are three that I want to bring to your attention. So if we've got son living in the house and he's not married, then, and he's got a girlfriend, tell him, hey, don't get married yet. We want to keep the estate recovery program. We want to have an exception to the estate recovery program. You stay single, and then at mom's death, we won't have estate recovery. There are other ways to avoid estate recovery, and that includes using a ladybird deed or a transfer on death deed. Now, each of these deeds accomplishes the same goal, which is to avoid estate recovery, but we use them in different circumstances depending on the situation that the house is in. I'm not going to go into the details about the differences between them. Just know that that is something that we can use to avoid estate recovery, and that is not considered a gift. So if mom has capacity or enough capacity to say, yes, I want to give my house to my kids after I die, then she can execute a ladybird deed or a transfer on death deed, and then we can avoid estate recovery at her death. Excuse me. Okay. Now I have a couple of things I want you to know about Medicare. So many times I have people who are in the nursing home getting rehab, and Medicare is paying for part of that rehab. And the person gets told, Medicare is not going to pay for your rehab anymore because you've plateaued. You're not improving any longer. Understand as the family that that is not the right standard. The rehab folks still use it, but there was a lawsuit against CMS, and there was a settlement of that lawsuit. And in that settlement, called the GIMO case, JIMMO, called the GIMO case, the court approved the settlement that said, look, if rehab is necessary to keep the person from declining, then Medicare should still cover it. It's not just that the person is not improving. Medicare covers rehab to keep you from declining further, not just when you are improving. So if you're in a situation where you think, look, mom needs more rehab, and the rehabilitation people are saying, well, she's not improving anymore, she's plateaued. Don't let that stop you. Be an advocate for your loved one and say, wait a minute, that's not the right standard. If rehabilitation would keep her from declining further, she's entitled to Medicare paying for her rehabilitation, continuing to pay for her rehabilitation. It's very important, and it happens all the time, that even with this lawsuit and the settlement of this lawsuit, we still have nursing homes and rehabs saying, you're not going to be covered anymore. Okay? So keep that in mind. Plateauing is not the standard. The other thing to keep in mind is, as you know, Medicare has an annual open enrollment period, and that's from October through December. And there are ads on the television, on the radio, everywhere you can imagine, from people wanting you to switch to their Medicare Advantage plan. And you need to understand that Medicare Advantage is different from regular Medicare. And if you're satisfied with what you've got with your Medicare that you have, you don't have to switch during open enrollment. Ignore all those ads. It's not a scam, because of course they are offering a service, but it confuses people. And I've had people switch when that wasn't because they thought they were supposed to. They thought they had to because they got mail, they got ads, and they thought, oh my gosh, this is so good, I need to switch. No, Medicare Advantage plans typically are not going to offer you, they offer additional services, it is true. But if you're on a Medicare Advantage plan and you're very ill, you're going to likely wish you were back on regular Medicare. And if you switched from Medicare, regular Medicare, and you had a supplemental policy, a Medigap policy, and then you switch to an Advantage plan, and you're not happy with that Advantage plan, then remember that you're not going to be able to get back on that supplemental policy. Or if you do, the premiums could be much higher. When you first sign up for Medicare at age 65, there's a window when you can get into a Medigap policy without any health underwriting. There's no worry about pre-existing conditions. But if you get out of that Medigap policy, like with getting on a Medicare Advantage plan, and then you're not happy and you want to go back to the Medigap policy, you're not going to be able to do it without them considering your pre-existing conditions. And that's going to increase your premium. So the takeaway is, during Medicare annual open enrollment period, don't be fooled by all those ads, by all that mail, by all that stuff coming in. If you're happy with the care you're getting, stick with it. You don't have to switch. Okay. Now, if anybody has Medicaid now, and they've been getting letters from Medicaid, let me back up. I wanted to touch on the changes to Medicaid during COVID. Medicaid has been keeping people on the benefit during the pandemic, but they've been sending out letters that say, you're still eligible, but it looks like when the pandemic is over, you're not going to be eligible anymore. Ignore those letters. They are having some sort of strange problem with their system that sends out letters that has this message in it, and they won't correct it. But as I have been led to believe, that is not the statement that they're saying, that you're not going to qualify when the pandemic is over, is false. And unfortunately, they just haven't corrected it. So if you are eligible for Medicaid now and you get one of those letters, don't worry. It's not going to kick you off when the pandemic is over. And if you're worried that it will, give me a call and we'll work on it. But it shouldn't. So I've saved maybe too much time for questions. I went kind of fast, but let's go ahead and open it up for questions. If Jennifer, if you can check the chat box for me.
Great, thank you. We do have one question that just came in, and if you would like to ask a question, please feel free to add it into the chat. Carol, will you be using your slides anymore, or should I close those
No,
out?
let me take those out.
Okay, great. So great, thank you. So one question we have right now is, how do we know the difference between Medicare and Medicare Advantage plan?
Wow, okay. That is an excellent question. If you have Medicare, you're going to have A and B, and your Advantage plan takes the place of A and B. And that is a great question because the answer is so complex.